Hello everyone, welcome. So I have a question for all of you NEET aspirants. Do you want to be a good doctor? Now this is a rhetoric question. The answer of course is yes. Yes, you want to be a good doctor. But do you know what you have to do to be a good doctor? Well, of course I have to clear this examination, NEET examination. Need to get into a good medical college, and from there I can be in the company of best doctors and best professionals, and I can be a good doctor myself. That answer is known. But do you know what you have to do to get there? You have to clear this exam. And for that, you need to score good marks. I say great marks in physics so that it can happen. So my name is Sandesh, and today I'm going to tackle this exact question. How can I get good marks in physics so I can get good marks in NEET and I can be a good doctor? So let's go ahead. Let's first talk about the exam itself. NEET 2024 exam, as all of you must know by now, is going to be conducted in May of 2024. So for all of you appearing, that's 6 months left. Next, to score a good mark in NEET, a good score is somewhere around 600 plus marks. I'm not saying 600, I'm saying anything above 600. Okay, that's what we should be aiming for. Next, to do that, you need to score at least 150 out of 180 marks allotted for physics. Now that's a minimum requirement. If you're planning on getting a good score, if you're planning 600 plus, you need to distribute your weightage evenly. Okay, so you have 360 marks for bio, 180 for physics, 180 for chemistry. That's how you should split your marks: 150, 150 and 300. Okay, we want to be balanced. To do that, the bottom line is we need to score 150 marks in physics. Now it might sound difficult, but it is not. When you follow a path, you follow a plan. And let me just explain you the plan real quick. So my plan is, I want you all to follow this 10-step process that I've made for you. So first of all, without this, you cannot even begin. Master your basics. Make sure your basics are clear. Make sure you have read your textbooks thoroughly. Okay, there should not be a concept that is left behind. There should not be anything that you don't know about physics. Okay, at least what is in your NCERT textbook. That's the basics. Next, once you are done with that, once you are confident enough that you have mastered the basics, you can move on to an organized study plan that I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so I don't want you all to just take a book and start preparing and you have no idea which chapter you are doing today and no idea which chapter you are doing tomorrow. We have 6 months. We will take into account each and every day in this 6 months and we'll plan that day. Okay, and that way we stay focused, we stay organized, and we don't waste any time. Moving on, I think the next thing you should do is to have a comprehensive assortment of study material. What I mean by that is something that is complete on its own, a material that is complete on its own. You don't need to go to another material for another thing, then another material for another thing. Oh, I have this particular book for this chapter, but not for that one. Let's do this thing where we have a complete set of all the study material available at our hands, so we don't waste any time finding them, ordering them, waiting for them to arrive, this and that, wasting time on internet. We don't want that. Next is timely syllabus completion. Now, when I'm going to tell you which chapters to study and what to prepare and what not to do, I want you all to follow it very clearly. Okay, it needs to be done timely, it needs to be finished on time properly, so that we can ensure that everything else falls into place. Okay, moving on, you need to revise multiple times before the exam. I say multiple times. I say at least 3 complete syllabus revisions. At least 3. You can do more, people do more. But that's where your goals should be, okay? Don't say 6 months, this many chapters, this much time. No, you need time for revision and another revision after that. So plan like that. Moving on, solve previous year questions or question papers as a whole. So once you have progressed enough in your syllabus, once you have finished a topic to an extent where you are confident now, you can go for previous year questions, or when you have finished the complete syllabus itself, you can go for the whole paper itself. Okay, so that's when this will come. This will come on quite late in the stage, but moving on nonetheless, I want you to practice mock test, as many mock tests as possible. 10, 15 is the standard. Okay, you don't have to do mock tests from your organization or whichever institute you are in. What you can do is you can subscribe to any online or offline mock tests. There are millions of them available on the internet. You can find free ones as well if you want and practice them. Okay, the goal is to practice at least 15. Moving on, clear all your doubts. Now, doing all this, solving papers, practice mock test, is for nothing if you don't clear the doubts you have in that. Okay, see, when you make a mistake, you don't immediately learn from it. It's when you clarify the mistake, it's when you fix it, that's when you learn. So it's important that you clear all your doubts, make sure that it's all sorted, and then you can move on. And this is my favorite step, and the most important one I feel like throughout this 10-step program. I want you all to believe in yourself. Come on, you can do it, okay? You can do it, and you will. So believe in yourself, be confident, don't lose your traction, don't lose your hope, don't get distracted. Moving on, the last and final step, and that's your result, crack NEET 2024. If you follow this, and you follow it like I say, you'll be able to crack the exam in no time without any concern. So, I was talking about timely syllabus completion and adopting an organized study plan. How can I do that? How can I be organized? How can I finish chapters on time? Well, I have a trick for you. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to list out all the chapters from both years, and we're going to look at how important they are, how frequently they're asked, and how many questions from there are asked. And based on that, what we are going to do is, we are going to make up a plan of how to study, how much time to devote a particular chapter, and how little to devote to something that is less important. Okay, so first we'll start with 11th. Let's start with first chapter of 11th. Let's talk about units and dimensions first. First and foremost, the 0th chapter of physics, as I like to call it. This is not here, not there. It's just somewhere in between. Although not a lot of importance is given to this chapter in your institutions, it carries a lot of weightage. Moving on, motion in 1D and 2D generally have 2 to 3 questions coming from them, although the trend has been on the decline. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let's talk about laws of motion. Now, laws of motion always carries a question or two, and these questions are a little difficult, but nonetheless, it's a topic that keeps recurring. Work power energy, the trend has been on the decline. Work power energy doesn't get asked as much, or not independently at the very least. Okay, the questions are combined with something else. So keep that in mind. Next is rotation. Rotation is very consistent in the amount of questions asked and the difficulty of questions asked. Rotation questions are moderate and difficult, and they tend to always be there, at least 2 or 3 of them every year. Okay, so you can see in the last 3 years, we've seen around 7 questions from rotation. So when you practice rotation, go solve those questions. Okay, find them, solve them. Moving on, gravitation. Gravitation consistently 2 questions every year, no exceptions. Every year there'll be questions, and the questions tend to be difficult. Okay, kinetic theory of gases, thermodynamics. Now, questions from these topics are a bit of rare. Only thermodynamics is the one that usually gets asked, but sometimes it doesn't appear as well. So the entirety of kinetic theory of gases, thermo and thermal properties are a little infrequent. So we'll address that when we get there. Mechanical properties of solids, often questions 1 or 2, simple questions. Questions are formula based. Okay. Then comes fluids. Fluids usually gets 2 questions, and it has been getting questions continuously. So think about that as well. Oscillation and waves consistently gets 2 questions every year, and I have seen this when I check the papers. These questions are super easy. Okay, all of you can do this as long as you remember the formulas in that. Okay, formulas of beats, formulas of waves, this and that. You can do those questions. Moving on, let's look at the 12th chapter-wise breakdown now. The same thing for your 12th standard syllabus. Let's start with the first chapter. Let's start with electrostatics. Electrostatics, now you will see this trend in 12th that questions are much frequent and questions are more in number. 12th standard carries more weightage. Electrostatics carries a lot of weightage. 2 to 3 questions on an average every year, sometimes even 4. Questions range from moderate to difficult. Sometimes the questions are difficult. There was a year where there were only 2 questions, but both were difficult. So, take that what you want from that. Next is capacitors. A question or 2 from capacitors. Sureshot, easy questions, formula based. So, moving on. Current electricity. Now, this is the biggest player here. You have 4 to 5 questions coming every year Questions are easy. Questions are not that difficult if you have the practice. Current electricity doesn't ask for difficult questions. It asks for questions which you have practice in. Okay, so make sure you practice this. Moving on, moving charges in magnetism, 2 to 3 questions on average every year. Not that surprising. Electromagnetic induction usually carries 2 questions, and these questions are quite good. Okay, so make sure you practice that as well. AC now, another important player here. 4, 2, 3. Now there's not a consistency here, but there is a single point to note. If you have a question paper of NEET, there'll be at least 2 or 3 questions of AC, and if you don't remember the formulas, or if you haven't practiced it, it will be difficult for you. Okay, moving on, ray optics. Now this might come to you as a surprise, but ray optics actually carries a lot of weightage in NEET. Okay, much more than other competitive examinations. Ray optics is asked more often. Questions are asked in such a way that they're complicated, they take time, they need you to be on your toes, they need you to be 100%. Okay, atoms and nuclei. Questions are asked a lot, but the questions are not that difficult. Same with dual nature and wave optics. Simple questions. All right. EM waves, semiconductors, and communications. I want to talk about semiconductors for a second first. You can see the trend in semiconductor here, or the lack of it. There is no trend, there is no growth, there is no decrease. It's a constant. The questions every year are 3 at the very least. The questions are of same type. They always ask basically the same thing. They give you a circuit, and they give you logic gates, and they ask you to calculate the truth table or find out a certain value in the truth table. That will be a question. Then a question on transistors. That will be a question, and another question which is theory based on the logic of circuit gates. Semiconductors itself is another question. So there's no trend here. Semiconductors, very important topic. Questions always get asked, and they're always almost the same type. Okay, moving on, communication systems. An odd question here and there. Nothing you couldn't solve even without preparing too much for communications. Okay, all right. So now that we have looked at all the question occurrences and the importance of this, let's do one thing. Let's get an overview of all of this data. I've thrown a lot of data at you. Let's get an overview of all this data. Let's see how it looks like, and let's see where we should prioritize and focus. Okay, so to begin with, here's a chart that tells you which of the topics are more in weightage and which of the topics are less in weightage. I've divided the topics in 5 groups. Electricity, AC, magnetism, all of that. Your book 1 of 12th standard has been clubbed here. Then your book 2, most of it, of 12th standard is clubbed here. Okay, so you can already see that this portion of the graph, almost 60% of the portion of this graph is basically 12th standard, even more than that. So what do you understand from here? Obviously something you already know. 12th standard carries a lot of weightage, both in terms of questions asked and in terms of the difficulties of questions asked. Okay, so it's very important that you practice these chapters well. Moving on is mechanics. Mechanics, which is taught as the first part of your 12th standard, carries a hefty weightage, almost 30% of the weightage. And the problem with mechanics is quite a lot to prepare. So okay, we'll talk about that. Thermo, not a lot of weightage, not a lot of questions. Think about it. Now, solids, fluids, and wave, almost same weightage as thermo, but a lot less to study, a lot less to prepare. So this is a good part. Okay. Now that we understand the trend, now that we understand the weightage each chapter and the section carries, let's do one thing. Let's prepare a plan based on this data. Okay, we're not going to go in blind in the battle. We're going to analyze, we're going to make up a plan where we can tackle the easiest, the lowest hanging fruits first. And we can secure those marks, move on. Secure the next marks, move on. So what I want you to do when you begin is to start here. Now this is your book 2 of 12th standard, ray optics, modern physics, semiconductors, EM waves, all those chapters. I want you to start specifically with ray optics. And I have a good reasoning for that. This whole cohort that I've mentioned here, optics and modern physics, generally the questions tend to be easier than the other chapters. Okay, once you practice them enough, you might find yourself doing these more often and with more accuracy than other chapters. For example, mechanics. Okay, you'll do better here than in mechanics. Ray optics, very important, carries a lot of weightage. Questions asked are good. So I want you to practice ray optics very well. Take a week, read it, go through the basics, master the basics, then move on to chapter preparation, solve study materials, then move on to previous year questions. Solve all ray optics previous year questions, as many as you can find. Finish it up. Do it in a week. Okay, split your time, give it to physics, finish ray optics in the first week. Let it not go above that. Okay, next move on to semiconductors. Now you might be saying, sir, why not go in order? There's no need to go in order. These chapters are not necessarily related to each other. You can start anywhere, you can do in any order you want. But I want you to follow my order. I want you to start next with semiconductors because that's the second most weightage carrying chapter in this. Especially semiconductors has same type of questions every year. Every year the same thing is asked. Every year you have to basically do the same thing with a little bit of values changed. Why not secure these marks right here, right now? That's my logic here, okay? So go to semiconductors, practice it well, read the book well, and then go and bug your teachers about logic gates questions. If you understand them, very well. If you don't, go and bug your teachers. Go look online, find help in any way possible. The goal here is, if there's a question on logic gates in semiconductors, you should be able to solve it today and in the day of examination as well. Okay, so semiconductors, practice it well. Then later on, we can move on to the other parts in this cohort. There's wave optics, there's dual nature, there's atoms and nuclei. I want to specifically talk about atoms and nuclei. Now suppose you finish these two, that's 2 weeks of work done, maybe 3, that's okay. You can now start atoms and nuclei, you can now focus on this. Atoms and nuclei usually has 3 or 4 types of questions. You have your Bohr's model in atoms, which has the energy, radius, velocity calculation, all those things for Bohr's model. And then nuclei, you have radioactive decay, half-life, this and that. Okay, so there's not a lot of type of questions that are being asked. The only thing is the questions are a little convoluted, okay, a little complicated. They're just trying to test if you understand what's happening. But with enough practice, you will be able to finish this chapter, both of them, within a week. Take a little bit more, that's okay. So with that being done, you are now left with just a few more chapters from this cohort. You are left with dual nature, EM waves, and that's about that. Both of them together should not take more than a week to complete. That way, you have now finished all of this in a month's time. Okay, no more than that, just a month. Okay, remember, we're not giving all of the time to physics, and at the same time, we're not wasting all of the time as well. We're making sure what the time we do give to physics is utilized well and on time. Okay, next cohort I want you to work with, next subsection, is electricity and magnetism. Now this is your book 1 of class 12. In that, what I want you to do is start with current electricity first. Okay. Now all of you must be saying current electricity is a good chapter. Usually, generally, people don't find it that difficult. That's okay. I don't want you to master the basics now. Maybe you already done that. If not, do it. But what I want you to focus on is this thing. Practice of current electricity. And I'm talking hundreds of questions. At least 250, 300 questions from the chapter itself. Find a comprehensive study material like I mentioned. Find as many questions as you can, solve as many questions as you can. Current electricity is all about the amount of practice you put in it. Okay, the more you practice, the better you become in this chapter. And believe me, it's important. I say it's important because look at the amount of questions asked. 4 every year, consistently. That's 16 marks. Do you want to lose them? Do you want to lose even a single one? No. So let's move on. Once you're done with current electricity, take a week, take 2, doesn't matter. Go to AC. There are 3 guaranteed questions from AC, and I want you to get them all. AC is mostly just a formula-based chapter with not a lot of types of questions being asked. There's general set of circuits that will be asked with a set of formulas attached to them. And if you master those formulas, you've got those marks. Okay, so move on next to AC. Find out those different types of questions. We'll discuss them as we go along as well in the coming videos. But find out those questions, practice those questions, and make sure AC is done as well. Then that leaves you with these chapters. Now let me talk about it. Magnetism. It's a lengthy chapter, a lot of concepts, a lot of formulas, a lot of confusion, finding out the direction and magnitude of magnetic field, I know. But it's okay because it carries a lot of weightage, so that effort is worth putting. Take a week and do that. Electrostatics again carries a lot of weightage, although it is a little complicated for you guys maybe. Take a week and do that. Good? Next is EMI and capacitors. Now EMI doesn't carry a lot of weightage, but the questions that are asked are a little difficult as well. So think about it and practice it, okay? Go through the basics, try to solve easy to moderate questions, and try to finish it up as quickly as possible. Next is capacitors. Capacitors generally is an easy chapter. It only has a few types of questions, and if you practice those properly, there's not a lot to go wrong with capacitors. So I would say that all of this could be done within 2 weeks, okay, or 3. It depends on how quickly you pick up. By this time, I hope you have picked up the speed of studying. You have increased your number of hours, and your output has increased. So roughly on an average, I think we can finish this in 2 months. Okay, I'm giving you a lot of time here. I'm being a lot generous. So let's say you finish this in 2 months. Now it's December. Now your pre-boards are starting, and you want to prepare for them. But at the same time, your goal is very clear to you, and your goal is the NEET 2024 examination. So what I want you to do, a little controversial, but this is what I want you to do in January. I want you to start with 11th standard. Now you might be asking me, sir, why 11th standard? I have pre-boards coming. I want to study for 12th now. But that's the thing, you already have. That's all of your 12th syllabus. Isn't that neat? You're already done with this. Now you can give your extra time that you are left with to 11th standard chapters. See, understand, 60% of your marks are done. They're sure, they're in the bag. That's that. Now you want to focus on the rest of the 40%, and you can give it a little less time. You can give more time to your pre-boards or other subjects. You can do this in the background. Now what I want you to do here, especially in 12th, 11th standard, is not to start at mechanics. That is not advisable. Okay. Some people, what they like to do is, oh, I want to study. Let's pick up the first book and pick up the first chapter, and then they take 10 days to finish that chapter, and then they're completely demotivated. Don't do that. Start somewhere unrelated. Okay, now this is completely unrelated. Start here. Start with solids. There are a lot of formula-based questions in solids. You can solve them, you can practice well, and you can move on. Go to fluids. Now there are simple questions that are appearing in NEET examinations from fluid. Questions on terminal velocity, for example, formula-based question. What happens if I double the radius? What happens to terminal velocity? Questions like that. Okay, not too difficult questions from Stokes' theorem, from other parts of fluid dynamics like Bernoulli's equation. You can practice this and you can master this in no time. Shouldn't take more than a week each. Actually, shouldn't even take that much. But let's give you time because, like I said, you are doing this in a little hindsight. You're doing it in the background. Moving on, waves. Now, what I've seen in waves and oscillations both, is the type of questions asked. Oscillations in general usually has simple harmonic motions questions, and in that it's just time period for the pendulum, calculate time period for the pendulum, calculate time period for this, if omega is given, calculate t, things like that, simple questions. Okay, so definitely not something to overlook. Questions are consistently 3 and consistently easy, so focus on waves and oscillations as well. Once you are done with all of that, now I hope it shouldn't take more than a week to do all of this, but it does. That's okay as well, because next we are going to go to mechanics. Now in mechanics, now this is where we take a pause a little bit. I have a lot to talk about mechanics. Depending on how you were in 11th standard, either you were studying very well at the start of 11th standard or you were not serious at all. Mechanics could either be very good for you or very bad for you. If you were of the studious type, then well, okay, you already know a lot of mechanics because you did a lot of it in 11th. And if you don't, I have a good news. You don't have to waste a lot of time on mechanics. In fact, I say Don't waste a lot of time on mechanics. All of you, what I want you to do is make sure to set a boundary and a timeline for each chapter. Okay, laws of motion should be done in this time. If it's not, I'll move on. Work power energy should be done in this time. If it's not, I'll move on. People fall into this habit, this trap of just studying mechanics way too much, wasting too much of their time, important time on mechanics, and yielding little to no results. Okay, so let's not do that. Let's be focused and let's direct our attention where it is required. And where it is required is in units and dimensions. 3 questions every year, sometimes even 4. Questions from units and dimensions are usually combined with other chapters, so they could ask you to calculate units and dimensions of all the quantities in gravitation chapter. But that needs units and dimensions practice as well, isn't it? So what I want you to do is when you start with units and dimensions, take it seriously, solve as many questions as possible, and clarify all your doubts before moving on. Okay, that's important. Next, now questions from kinematics, especially motion in 1D, are decreasing in trend, but the questions that are asked actually are very difficult. Okay, a lot of questions asked there are calculation heavy. They need a lot of practice. You need to remember the certain formulas of ascent and so on to solve these questions. So what I'm trying to tell you here is kinematics in general needs a lot of practice. So give that time to kinematics. Kinematics focus on motion in 1D. Motion in 2D has generally been on the back burner. It usually has a question or two, not more than that. So, give more time here than in kinematics in 2D. Next, NLM in gravitation questions, what I have seen so far is that the questions are difficult, especially questions from gravitation. Gravitation questions have been a little tricky for students, getting the signs wrong, getting the additions wrong, and the wrong answer is there in the option, so you are tempted to select it. These questions are meant to trap you. So is the case with NLM. NLM questions are also meant to trap you. NLM questions, sometimes if your approach is wrong, your answer might be correct, but you have taken too much time. So you've wasted your time. So be careful, practice only till the required amount. Okay, don't waste too much time on NLM and on gravitation, because you have simple things like rotation, for example, to score from. Rotation usually gets 3 questions to 2. Questions are simple. There's a question on center of mass generally, and then there's a question on moment of inertia generally. Okay, a question here and there from angular momentum conservation as well, but nothing too complicated, nothing you cannot do with practice. So focus on rotation, try to get to rotation by doing all of this, and finish up all of this at the very least in 2 weeks. If it spills over by a week, okay, but don't go too much than that. Okay, don't waste too much time on mechanics. Don't fall into the trap. Lastly, I want to discuss our nearest and dearest chapter of all, thermodynamics. Now I know people don't like this chapter. Some of you might already be groaning at the sight of this chapter. That's why I kept it at last. I know what you guys like and what you guys don't. Thermodynamics in general is not a lot of people's favorites. It has a lot of complicated concepts. You have to read a lot, understand a lot of theory, and even then still, you mess up calculations, you can lose marks. So, on an average 5 questions, now that's not less, that's a lot of questions, that's 20 questions, that's 20 marks, sorry. And you need to make sure that you get these marks. So how do you do it? There are 3 chapters in thermodynamics. Thermodynamics itself, then thermal properties of matter, and lastly there's KTG. Now based on the trend, based on what I've seen in the papers, this is my plan. Start with thermodynamics first. Master your basics, solve as many questions as you can, go quickly as you can to previous year questions and solve as many previous year questions as you can. Okay, if you are not able to solve them, it's okay, ask your doubts. If you have solutions, look at the solutions, try to understand. Finish thermo first. Then I say go to KTG next. Kinetic theory of gas. Now how do you study this? I have a simple idea for you. Pick up your NCERT book, think of it, the chapter itself, think of it as a novel, and read the entire chapter out. Okay, you read it once. If you don't understand, it's okay, go back and read it again. You'll understand it better the second time or the third time. take as many tries as it takes. Finish this chapter. It's a lot of theory and a lot of reading that is required for KTG. But if you do that, the questions are also theoretical and you can get them very quickly. Okay. Lastly, thermal properties, the last chapter we are discussing. Now, thermal property has been on the decline in terms of questions asked, which is a good news because there are a lot of complicated concepts in thermal properties. And I don't want you to waste a lot of time on that. Okay. So read the chapter, practice few questions. Depending on the time you have, you can solve PYQs, or if you don't, that's okay. You won't find a lot of them anyways. Okay. So let's summarize what we have seen so far. What I did was, I told you, first of all, is the amount of questions asked from each chapter, the weightage that 12th standard carries in 11th. So what we decided was, let's start with 12th. That sounded like a good idea. So I started with 12th, but not just anywhere. I started with optics and modern physics because that's where all of the marks, easy marks were. And next I went to electricity and magnetism because it also carried a lot of weightage. With that done, I finished my 12th standard syllabus in 2 months. And in the next 3 to 4 months left, I dedicated 2 or 3 months of the time in revising as much as I can from my 11th standard chapters. I didn't start with mechanics though, started with this, finished this in a week, finished this in 2, went to mechanics. Mechanics was being done in 2 to 3 weeks. And then lastly, with the time left, I went to thermodynamics. Now this can all be done in the background. This can all be done with whatever is going on with your other things. This can be your self-study plan. And this can be your self-sufficient self-study plan. Okay. So if you ask me, sir, I want to be a good doctor, but I don't know what to do. Here's what you have to do, and here's how you can do it. So let's get started then. Let's start realizing our dreams.